If you know anything about this channel or know anything about me, period, then you know that I am one of, if not the biggest critics of Mike Tomlin ever. For the past 7 years now, it's basically been the same season for the Steelers, just structured differently. Win games that you shouldn't win, you get lucky, be in the playoff hunt late in the season, you go on a losing streak that hurts your chances, and you either backdoor into the playoffs or not make it at all. If the former happens, you get demolished in the wild card. But winning 9 or 10 games isn't just satisfactory to Tomlin or Art Rooney II. No. It's the fans who get up in your case about it. Criticizing Tomlin in any way in this city gets you labeled as spoiled, ungrateful, and a racist. I've made countless videos on this channel in the past talking about Tomlin needing to be fired, how the Steelers won't win another Super Bowl with him, or how they won't even win another playoff game with him. All the Steelers have done over the past half decade and even since around 2018 have vindicated my claims on Tomlin, but those have been rehashed so many times. Instead, I decided to do one better in this video. I'm going to talk about his worst overall losses as head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Tomlin fans will resort to their usual weak excuses for him and defend him because of the non-losing seasons. They can say I'm wrong about Tomlin all they want, but you know how I know I'm right? Because it's not just me saying these things about him, but other fans in other fan bases and the media have chimed in as well about it, while I see Tomlin fans have emotional breakdowns in my comment sections. The fact is, Tomlin does not do more with less. That implies that you outcoach your opponent and you outplay them and you outscheme them. The Steelers have not done that in the Mike Tomlin era, or at least in the past 7 years or so. Tomlin has done less with more, and it's very evident in the past decade that that's been the case, especially when you have the best offense in the league for a good 5 years. He's had a Super Bowl roster and an elite offense and underachieved in spectacular fashion. So if I can't enjoy the Steelers anymore because of Tomlin's fans and blind fans, then I've made it my personal mission to expose him for the fraud that he truly is and why he needs to get out of here. Ladies and gentlemen, I officially present you the 10 worst losses of Mike Tomlin's career. So kicking things off at number 10 is the 2007 loss to the New York Jets. 2007 was Mike Tomlin's inaugural season as head coach for the Steelers, and the Steelers went 10-6, won the AFC North, and were the 4th seed in the AFC. Normally, not a bad first year for a head coach, but while I'm not going to say anything about losing Week 17 to the 4-11 Ravens because the Steelers were resting starters with the North secured and the playoffs next week, what I will say is that there's no place for losing to a 1-8 Jets team in Week 11. At 7-2, the Steelers were riding a 3-game winning streak that included a win against every team in the division, more notably a 38-7 blowout of the Ravens on Monday Night Football, where Big Ben demolished the Ravens in the first half with 5 touchdown passes, and James Harrison terrorized the Ravens all night, and a thrilling comeback win against the Browns the ensuing week that would end up deciding the division. But the next week against the Jets, the Steelers totally laid an egg. The Steelers fell behind 10-0 after the first quarter, but battled back all game and found themselves ahead 16-13 in the fourth quarter. With that still being the score with 2:23 left in regulation, the Jets went 13 plays and 76 yards in 2 minutes to tie the game. You guessed it, Tomlin didn't call a single timeout during that drive and only called one timeout the entire second half because little did we know this would be the first of many Tomlin specials in this era of Steeler football. The Jets won the game 19-16 in overtime after both teams exchanged punts. I'm not going to go too hard on him for this loss because, like I said, it was his first season as head coach. And like any fan, I'll cut him a break and hope that it's just a learning curve and he learns from it, hoping that, he bounces back. But looking back on this one, after this game, the Steelers went 3-3 the rest of the way. Even if the Steelers win this game, they finish 11-5 and still only end up with the 4th seed in the AFC due to the conference record tiebreaker as the San Diego Chargers went 9-3 in the AFC. The Steelers went 8-4 in the AFC, as San Diego also finished 11-5 that season. So I'm not going to question the seeding right there, but this started a frustrating and tiring trend of playing down to competition on nearly every single occasion. But hey, at least the Steelers won't lose to another team that's this bad, right? Number 9, the 2014 loss to the New York Jets. Oh, look, another loss to another trash-ass Jets team. In 2014, the Steelers went 11-5 after going 8-8 in back-to-back seasons and stole the AFC North from the Bengals in the final week of the regular season. They were the 3rd seed in the AFC with an offense that featured Ben Roethlisberger putting together a career season and a season that had been good enough for MVP had Aaron Rodgers not had the season he had, Le'Veon Bell plowing through run defenses, and Antonio Brown emerging as the best wide receiver in the league. This incredible season ended abruptly in the wild card at home against the Ravens due to a dominant defensive showing, and the Steelers could have gotten the 2nd seed in the AFC over the Denver Broncos via the strength of schedule tiebreaker, and if in Week 10 they didn't lose to the lowly 1-8 New York Jets. In Week 10, the Steelers were red hot at 6-3 going into that game in MetLife against a terrible Jets team. It looked like a sure victory for the Steelers. Not exactly. The Jets started Michael Vick on his last legs in this game and were coached by career loser Rex Ryan, and it was a disaster from the get-go. The Jets scored 17 points in the first quarter and were down 17-0 after the first and 17-3 at halftime. Just outright inexcusable. Jersey added a field goal to make it 20-3 going to the fourth quarter, and the final of 20-13 is misleading. The offense was quiet until a garbage time touchdown pass made it that score. Ben threw 2 picks and a garbage time touchdown, so I'm not going to say he was blameless for this game, or the offense for that matter, as they only got 1 touchdown on 10 possessions. But I mean, come on. When your coach isn't using timeouts and uses 2 of them well under the 2-minute warning, one of which is when Vic is kneeling the ball, you have to take accountability. You overlooked your opponent after your QB had a historic run in the previous 2 weeks and got outplayed by a washed-up QB and a coach who's awful in big games as well. 80% of the Steelers' losses in 2014 were to teams who missed the playoffs, but this one was the worst because there's simply no excuse for it. Unlike the loss to the Jets in 2007, where the seeding wouldn't have mattered, this one could have moved you up higher in the AFC, and like I said, it could have gotten you the 2nd seed if you just took care of business against a terrible team, and that's what separates this game from the former. Number 8, the 2016 AFC Championship Game. There should be no shame in losing to the Pats dynasty of the 2000s and 2010s, but when you don't even try to make adjustments and go with the same defensive plan over and over again, that's going to land you on this list. The 2016 Steelers was a pretty turbulent season as they started 4-1. The offense was performing as advertised as the best in the league, and Big Ben got early season MVP consideration. Then in a 30-15 loss to the Miami Dolphins in Week 6, Big Ben suffered a knee injury that ended up being a torn meniscus that needed surgery. The Steelers went on an incredible run as after a devastating loss to the Dallas Cowboys in Week 10 to drop their 4th straight and go to 4-5, playoff hopes for the Steelers were in big trouble. But the Steelers won out to close out the season to finish 11-5 and earn the 3rd seed in the AFC. In the playoffs, the Steelers defeated the 6th seed Dolphins soundly in the wild card, and then our most recent playoff game that the Steelers won, little did we know, Chris Boswell and the Steelers defense won the game in Arrowhead to set up the AFC Championship against the Patriots in Foxborough. Now, if there's one team that Tomlin could never defeat in his stint as head coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers, it was the Patriots. It always seemed like the Steelers never knew what they were doing against them, and they were too afraid to play them, and they were just always flat out outplayed. No game against the Patriots dynasty exemplified this more than this one. Earlier in the season, the Patriots beat the Steelers in Pittsburgh, but in this game, the Steelers were riding momentum, and people felt like this was their chance to conquer their demons against New England, especially in the playoffs. They were only reinforced. The Pats defense swallowed up the Steelers offense all night, and for some reason, Tomlin felt like playing zone defense against the Patriots was a good idea. I'll let you decide how it went. The final 36-17 appears to be a blowout, and it was, but it should have been a lot worse. At no point in this game did Tomlin ever make adjustments, change the scheme, and the team ever look motivated in this game. No pressure on Brady, no one covering, and the offense falling flat. Just like that, another great season for the Steelers ended with a thud because Tomlin once again bent the knee to Belichick. Number 7, the 2020 loss to the Cincinnati Bengals. Believe me, this isn't the only entry on here from the 2020 season, as you'll see that later in the video. In 2020, the Steelers had Big Ben return from missing all of 2019 with shoulder surgery. Although I believe Ben should have retired after 2019, there was no way he was going to because he wanted to honor his contract and he was still owed $41 million. Nevertheless, he took on the game manager type role, and the defense did the most of the work. As a result, the Steelers won their first 11 games of the season. While most of the wins were not convincing and felt hollow, and it felt inevitable that they'd lose a game. Then they lost to Washington on an unofficial Monday night game, and then they truly got exposed by the Buffalo Bills on Sunday night the following week, as a quarterback being carried by his defense that was being covered by short passes to receivers doing most of the work and a non-existent run game. Once teams knew that Ben didn't have his best abilities as a quarterback, getting the Steelers in a deficit was no longer a worry, as Ben couldn't rely on comebacks anymore and instead had to stat pad to save fate. That isn't Ben's style of play at all. And yet Tomlin did make a single adjustment because of the start of the season the Steelers had, so you enter Week 15 against the Bengals. At 11-2, the Steelers traveled to Cincinnati to face a 2-10-1 Bengals team going into that game who had a deep losing streak and no momentum whatsoever. The one-dimensional offense was on display, and the Steelers were lifeless in a 27-17 loss. But what's a game plan according to Tomlin? Let your team get a lengthy deficit and rely on your defense, your quarterback who's way over the hill, and the Bengals' own incompetence bail you out at the end of the day. No preparation, no fire, no urgency, no fucking care at all. To make matters worse, let's have Juju keep giving ammo to teams by him TikTok dancing on their logo at midfield before the game and not do anything about it until it's too late. But he's a great disciplinarian and a leader, am I right? This wasn't even the Steelers playing down to competition. There's that, and then there's just playing like complete ass, and that's what the Steelers did in this game. But this wasn't even the worst loss of the season. Number 6, the 2018 loss to the Oakland Raiders. You know, I could just bundle the entire 3-game losing streak that the Steelers had in the middle of the season of 2018 for this century, but if I had to pick just one of the 3, it's easily this one. This game against the 2-10 Raiders is like if the previous 2 losses got married and had a baby. This was probably the only time in my life where I wanted to punch a dent into my car and break my knuckle. And if there's any loss that exemplifies Tomlin's god-awful use of timeouts, it's this one. At 7-4-1, they faced the Raiders, who couldn't make it any more clear that they were tanking the season. So let's just fast forward to it. Big Ben got injured in the third quarter and temporarily had to miss some action as he was being evaluated. Tomlin put second-year QB Josh Dobbs in the game for the time being. As you could have predicted, the Steelers' offense was going nowhere. But the good news is the defense held their part as they kept the Raiders off the scoreboard the entire quarter, and Ben returned to the sidelines. So, looks like Ben's going to come back in the game and the Steelers are going to win the game, right? Right? Well, to begin the fourth quarter, the Steelers gave up an 8-minute drive that ended with a Raiders touchdown, and then Ben came back in the game to save the day for Tomlin's incompetence when the reason for him being on the sidelines cleared the play is just clearly dumb. So the Steelers took a 21-17 lead with over 2 minutes to go, and the Raiders marched right down the field to retake the lead. 2 plays, a minute 25 burned off the clock, and Tomlin calls no timeouts. And when he did use a timeout, it was after an incompletion. That's vintage Tomlin being a moron with clock manipulation. Boswell slipped on the game-tying field goal that would have sent it to overtime. And Boswell was blamed by Tomlin's idiot fans who know nothing about football, but the Steelers shouldn't even have been in that situation. If Tomlin uses his timeouts even after that big connection under the 2-minute warning and at the goal line, they still have a lot of time to win. But here's the cherry on top, this shit fest on why the Steelers lost this game.
He got looked at halftime. He got treatment. He came back out. We were waiting to see if he was going to be able to come back in. He was. Probably could have come in a series or so sooner, but we were in the rhythm and flow of the game.
Rhythm and flow. Yeah, I've seen more rhythm from a dude trying to do the jitterbug in a wheelchair than that offense. If I owned the Steelers, I'd have fired Tomlin on the spot after that sequence, and any other owner would have as well. The Steelers ended up 9-6-1 and missed the playoffs by a game. Number 5, the 2009 losses to the Kansas City Chiefs, Oakland Raiders, and Cleveland Browns. This was way too hard to decide to pick just one for this slide, so I'm going to give it a tie. In 2009, the Steelers were the defending Super Bowl champions, and after a slow 1-2 start, the Steelers won 5 straight to find themselves at 6-2 mid-season. They looked to be on pace to winning the AFC North for the 3rd straight season. However, they traveled to Arrowhead mid-season to play the Chiefs, who were 2-7 a week after the Steelers lost a tough game to the Bengals. The Steelers got 17 points in the second quarter and led 17-7 at halftime. Then the Chiefs tied it at 17 in the third and in the fourth at 24 all, and the game went to overtime where Ryan Suckup kicked the game winner. After that, the Steelers lost 3 more games, including the next 2. In Week 13, the 3-8 Oakland Raiders came to Heinz Field, and after the Steelers had a 10-6 halftime lead and led by that score going into the fourth quarter, the Steelers imploded, allowing 3 Oakland touchdown passes from former Steeler Bruce Gradkowski, including the game winner in the fourth with 9 seconds left to win the game 27-24 for Oakland. And finally, the Steelers traveled up north to face the 1-11 Browns for a Thursday night game 4 days later. Needless to say, the Steelers never stood a chance. The Browns won 13-6 on a miserable 16-degree night in Cleveland, and the Steelers were as ice cold as the weather was. Cleveland sacked Big Ben 8 times, didn't turn the ball over, and won the time of possession battle, but only mustered 218 total yards of offense. This was the Steelers' 5th loss in a row, the Browns' first win over the Steelers since 2003, and at 6-7, this essentially ended playoff hopes for the Steelers. If the Steelers win all 3 of these games, they most likely end up 12-4 with the 3rd seed in the AFC, and while most teams would take that in a heartbeat, the Steelers could have been 13-3 with a first-round bye if they could get a touchdown in the Bengals game. The Steelers had a tiebreaker over the Chargers that season, but of course, that didn't happen. It was a tough call between this and 2018 on which I should give the 5th place spot to, but I give this the slight nod because while 2018 was embarrassing to say the least, the Steelers still had a small lead in the division after that 3-game slide, and they held on to it for a few more weeks before dropping it. And as I said in the beginning of that entry, you could choose any of the 3 games during that losing streak for the 5th spot, so it's kind of hard to pick. So I give that slightly more leniency right there. As for 2009, the 5-game losing streak ended their season. You lost to 3 bottom feeders and you missed the playoffs as the defending champs in that fashion. That's just plain inexcusable. And you wonder why Steeler fans are always nervous in the Tomlin era when they go up against trash teams. Number 4, the 2020 AFC Wild Card. I don't even know where to start with this one. If you know me, then you'd know this was the game that officially made me begin calling for Tomlin to be fired. And the sad thing about this game is that I was starting to give him credit for 2019 because I really did have some newfound hope with him. Okay? I really did. Had the other three not been as embarrassing as this game, then this easily takes number one for me. But you guys all know the story right now. I already talked about the disgrace in Cincinnati on this list earlier in the video, but the Steelers narrowly escaped with a win over the Colts and then lost to the Browns in Cleveland the following week to close out the regular season. In the playoffs, the Steelers fell all the way from the first seed to the third seed, but they still had a home playoff game against the Cleveland Browns in the AFC Wild Card at 12-4. The Steelers had massive issues going into this game, and I think everyone noticed, but I really don't think anyone cared. From the very start of the game, and I mean the very start of the game, it was a disaster. Marquise Pouncey snapped the ball over Ben's head and rolled into their own end zone. Cleveland recovered for a touchdown, and just like that, 12 seconds into the game, the Browns had a 7-0 lead. It only got worse from there. Ben threw 2 picks in the first quarter, and the Browns led 28-0 after the first quarter. Everything else is secondary. Here's the thing. Am I mad that they lost the way they did? No, I've seen it before. It gave me massive 2017 vibes with the great start to the season, then the players talking massive shit and suffering a playoff meltdown at home. The thing that I'm most angry about in this game is that I got fooled. Okay? I thought this team was genuinely different, and they had changed. And Tomlin only reinforced his narrative in this game. Playing down to competition. Looking past opponents in the playoffs. Comments like nameless gray faces. Being blown out by a team who didn't even have their head coach. That is the epitome of being outcoached and not disciplining your team. This loss showed to me that Tomlin hasn't evolved. His coaching is outdated in today's NFL and that he'd be fired by any other franchise. I never took him seriously again after this loss, and I never will. Number 3, the 2023 losses to the 2-10 Arizona Cardinals and the 2-10 New England Patriots in 4 days, both of them at home. What happened from December 3rd through December 7th of 2023 is still so baffling to me. The Steelers got off to as bad of a start as you can possibly imagine to start off 2023, but they turned it around, and going into December, they found themselves at 7-4 and were amazingly the 5th seed in the AFC going into Week 13. What can possibly go wrong? Tomlin was getting Coach of the Year consideration. They had a newfound confidence with firing offensive coordinator Matt Canada, and the offense looked the best it had been in a few years. So the Steelers had to play 2 games in a span of 4 days, which, yes, it isn't easy to do, but the good news is they were playing the 2 worst teams in the league, both games at home. So instead of the Steelers taking full advantage of playing 2 horrible teams to earn them a playoff spot, they play their worst football I've personally ever seen. Apathetic, uninterested, no energy, no effort, just going through the motions to achieve mediocrity. The defense, good God. The most expensive defense in the league was made a mockery in the stretch. From allowing a 99-yard touchdown drive from Kyler Murray to not even getting a single PSI of pressure on the Patriots. They started Bailey Zappi in the latter game, and he hadn't thrown a single touchdown pass all season. He had 3 in the first half. You'd think Tom Brady was still the QB. It's definitely on Tomlin. From being too cute when they need to be precise, too conservative when they need to be aggressive, mind-blowingly bad play calls, and no preparation at all. 4th and 2? Sure, chuck it over the mountaintops. A direct snap to the tight end and passing on 1st and goal? What a brilliant idea. How in God's name do you think this team was trying to convince even themselves that they were taking themselves seriously? TJ Watt single-handedly carrying the team on his back, which looking back on it may have been the reason he got injured at the end of the season, and coaches out fooling themselves against Tomlin was on full display in 2023. As a result, the Steelers became the first team in NFL history to be over 500 and lose back-to-back games to teams that were 8 or more games under 500. Oh, but don't worry, Tomlin fans. The team still finished 10-7 and backdoored their way into the playoffs again because the Jaguars pulled an Uno reverse card from 2022. It's hard to say if these are the worst losses in Tomlin's career, but they're easily the worst regular season losses of his career. So what can possibly top this? Well, let's find out. Number 2, the 2017 AFC Divisional. The only reason this isn't number 1 is because the Steelers got a first-round bye, and it was well established that the Steelers had played down to competition this season. So, while it was a surprising playoff loss, it wasn't necessarily shocking. In 2017, Dan Rooney passed away in spring, and the Steelers dedicated the season to him. At 13-3 with a first-round bye, it looked like the Steelers lived up to it, but we all know it should have been 14-2 because of the no-catch BS. But even then, this sequence ensuing was bad enough. Regardless, the Steelers had a home game coming up in the playoffs. So, here's a little questionnaire for you, Mike Tomlin. Your team is hosting a playoff game against a team that blew you out 30-9 earlier in the season, and that team is coming to your house for the playoffs. Do you, A, use that as motivation to hype up your team, B, adjust your game plan from the previous game so you're not predictable, especially when you know the Jaguars will adjust theirs seeing that they beat you, C, remind the team that you're playing for your late owner, or D, completely overlook them, brush it off, and rely on your elite offense to bail you out again? If you guessed A, B, or C, you're just out of your mind. If you guessed D, no shit! The final score of 45-42 is not indicative to how bad this game was for the Steelers. The team fell behind 21-0 in the blink of an eye, and the rest of the game was glorified stat padding for Big Ben and the offense. This was just vintage Tomlin playoff failure, where he failed to motivate the team, adjust the game plan, or remind the players of their dedication to Rooney and remind them of what happened a few weeks prior. Instead, the team was overconfident and relied on their elite offense. They made Blake Bortles look like a passable QB in this game, while Leonard Fournette haunted them again. As a result, the Steelers were defeated at home, continuing a trend of underestimating opponents and believing they were above everybody else in the league. This started the Steelers being one-dimensional on offense with no running game and being QB heavy. This is also the game that made a lot of Steeler fans turn on Tomlin completely, and for me personally, Tomlin was down to his last strike after this game right here. So, before I get to number 1, let's talk about some honorable, or in this case, dishonorable mentions for this video. The 2015 second loss to the Ravens. 4-10 going into that game. They were decimated by injuries all season. They beat you at home earlier in the season, and they were starting Ryan Mallett at QB. A win would have clinched a playoff spot for the Steelers. Instead, they nearly missed it if the Bills didn't beat the Jets the following week. 2012 loss to the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland was 2-8 going into that game. The Steelers were coming off a tough loss to the Ravens the week before, and you'd have thought that the Steelers were the 2-8 team by watching this game. They turned the ball over 8 times and amazingly only lost 20-14. That's what happens when Brandon Weeden is the opposing QB. Ben was hurt, so I won't rip into them, and I definitely blame the offense more for this game. But don't tell me that you can't adjust to any of your schemes when Brandon Weeden is the QB and your opponent's coach is Pat Shurmur. 2019 loss to the Jets. Yet another loss to the Jets at a considerable point of the season. They were 5-9 and offensively challenged going into the game, but we were offensively challenged as well, so it was just a battle of who sucked worse, really. But this loss doesn't sting as much if you don't drop a crucial game to the Bills the week before that would put you in great shape for the playoffs, even with Ben out for the whole season. The 2025 AFC Wild Card loss to the Ravens. I chose this loss as the worst for this past season because let me break it down. The Colts and Cowboys were early in the season and would hold more merit if it was later in the season. The gauntlet were all decisive losses to good teams, but I'm in no way excusing them because that was your test to see if you were legit or not. And then the Browns' loss on Thursday night would take this spot easily because of the horrible clock management to close out the second half, and of course accepting the penalty after you declined it at first to give the Browns a second chance on third down, had it not been for the wild card against the Ravens here. Punting on 4th and inches down 7-0 in the second quarter when the play before your tight end was an arm extension away from a first down is just a coward and quitter move right there. Sure, the ball was inside your own 30, but with a QB that's pretty good at QB sneaks on inches plays and a gas defense that you trust for some reason, that's what lands it on here. But it's not quite number one. All right, let's get it over with. The worst loss of Mike Tomlin's career, the 2011 AFC Wild Card loss. Need I say more? The 2011 Steelers went 12-4 for the second season in a row, and while that's incredible, I alluded to earlier, it could have been their 4th straight season of winning 12 or more games. They finished second in the North due to being swept by the Ravens, who also went 12-4 that season, and traveled to Denver to face the 8-8 Broncos, who won the AFC West by total default, and were riding a cute run by quarterback Tim Tebow. The Steelers were an 8-point favorite coming into the game, and a win for the Steelers in this game meant they would have went back to Baltimore to face the Ravens in the divisional again. The Broncos got 20 unanswered points in the second quarter to take a 20-6 halftime lead. Pittsburgh fought back in the second half, however, as Mike Wallace scored on a touchdown run to cap off a brilliant drive in the third quarter, and the Steelers would end up tying the game in the fourth quarter in forced overtime. On the first play of overtime, Tebow threw a pass across the middle on a QB keeper to Demaryius Thomas, who took it the whole way for the game-winning touchdown. Now, here's the thing. We look back on this game and we're like, well, yeah, that's typical playoff Mike Tomlin right there. You lose to a team that had no business being in the playoffs. But back then, this was really shocking. Okay, Tomlin had a 5-2 playoff record going into this game. The Steelers were the defending AFC champs. They were popular favorites to at least make it back to the AFC Championship, and this loss was seen as a hiccup and a fluke loss on Tomlin's resume. It's true. I'm not making this up. This was all facts at the time. But now, it's seen as the beginning of where people started to call for Tomlin's head. This, to me, was the game that became the biggest reason why the Steelers never made it back to the Super Bowl with Mike Tomlin as the head coach, why they keep coming up short in the playoffs, and it kickstarted a trend of overlooking opponents on the big stage. The fact is, the team got too cocky, they got arrogant, and the game proved to be Tomlin's style of coaching that relied heavily on the high-end talent to save the day, and that's why this is his worst loss of his career. If you've made it this far into the video, you're most likely not a Tomlin fan because Tomlin fans are too busy screaming and crying into their pillow. I also know some dumbasses will say, oh, you just cherry-picked his worst games. He's coached great games too. Well, I sure as hell hope he did. He's been the head coach since 2007. I mean, I can honestly sit down here for 2 hours and talk about how he's done nothing more than be a mediocre head coach who's stuck in the past, still thinks it's the 80s where teams win by just running the ball and a strong defense, the cliche press conferences, the awful clock management, pathetic in-game decisions, lack of accountability, playing down to competition, and coasts on high-end talent to bail him out on his own incompetence, but I don't need to. You already know that. But I'll see a deflection of, well, Cowher and Noel did it too. And that just shows that they're purposely missing the point, because my point is obvious. Tomlin has done it more often than those two ever have done in their careers combined, and it's not close. The only reason he's here is because of the non-losing seasons, which most of them are 8 and 10 win seasons anyway, and because the Rooney Rule in this video proves it. Oh, and did I mention this is showing on March 15th, aka Tomlin's 53rd birthday? Happy birthday, Mike! Here's my gift to you, a video of your biggest coaching blunders. You've earned it, my friend. You've earned it.